Hello, LREA members. Happy Friday. Um, Today we are going to talk a little bit about charter schools and vouchers. They've been big in the news lately, especially vouchers. And so I want to talk a little bit about what those mean for public education and public schools. Um, just kind of a little overview of the dangers they pose. So, how many of you know somebody who goes to or who sends their children to charter schools? ESTEM, Lisa Academy. Um, there are lots of them in our city. We have the largest proliferation of charters in the state of Arkansas within the Little Rock School District. So, how many of you know someone that sends their children to a charter school? Probably most of you know at least one person. How many of you know someone who sends their kids to a private school? I'm sure all of you know somebody. I hope it's not any of you, because I'm going to share with you today how charter schools and vouchers make it harder for the traditional public schools, and they really don't do any better job of educating kids. So, first of all, let's talk about vouchers, because that's been a big thing in the legislature this last week. So, Arkansas already has a voucher program. It's called a scholarship, a Succeed Scholarship, and that's just another name for a voucher. And that voucher program that's been on the books for a while allows students with disabilities to go to a private school, gives them money to go to a private school, but they have to waive all of their special education rights in order to do it. So they can go to a private school, but the private school does not have to provide them with special education services. Um, if I were the parent of a special education student, I don't think that I would agree to do that, because those things are important for special education students to be successful. Um, the vouchers that are being proposed now actually give the students foundation funding, which is the per pupil amount that the districts get. It gives them that amount to go to a private school. Now, there are two voucher bills currently in the legislature. One of them is to provide vouchers for the entire state of Arkansas, and the other one is to provide vouchers only for students in Pulaski County. So both of them are kind of winding their way through the legislature. What those would do is they would give up to 500 students, or 400, one of the bills says, to, approximately $6,800 to attend a private school. The problem with that is most of the private schools in Little Rock cost a heck of a lot more than $6,800. So in order to use that money to go to a private school, they're going to have to probably go outside of Little Rock or Pulaski County to, say, Bryant or Benton, or one of those nearby locations where the private schools don't cost as much. The other problem is that the private schools are going to make it hard for those kids to get in anyway. Basically, probably unless they're athletes or academic superstars, they're not going to take them. There's a reason that private schools keep their tuition so high, and that is to keep a certain clientele. And so, I don't think that vouchers are going to go a long ways, especially in that amount. But what it does, if either one of these bills passes, it opens the door for additional vouchers, such as being able to deduct from your taxes the full amount of private school tuition. So that's a little more difficult um, and it obviously has a lot bigger implication for public schools because, as we all know, we're funded through taxes. So that's vouchers. Then charter schools, we've been talking about for a while. Like I said, we have probably the highest. Well, not probably. We do have the highest proliferation of charter schools in any city in Arkansas here in Little Rock, and we have quite a variety. We have some religious organizations that run charter schools. We have some corporations that run charter schools. The biggest ones in Little Rock are East-Em and Lisa Academy. So, what most charter schools have in common is that they will take any kid who applies in the beginning, and then after October 1st, which is the funding deadline, they start suspending those kids or counseling them out, and so they come back to us to educate in the traditional public schools. However, the money that funds those children's education is already tied to that charter school. And so it impacts you twice. It impacts you for the current year, and then that October 1st funding is what the next year's funding is based on. And so it impacts the traditional public schools for 2 years. And when you continue to lose students from the traditional public schools, especially your best and brightest, there are a couple of things that happen. Your test scores go down. It's harder to negotiate for salary increases or increases in payments on health insurance, increases in benefits. It's harder to fix buildings. It's harder to do lots of things that need to be done because when you lose 500 or 600 kids a year, that's a pretty heavy hit to the school district's budget. And so, like I said, that makes it a little more difficult to fund those things that as a union we want to be able to negotiate for. Another thing that happens with charter schools is that funding that's intended to go towards the education of children is funneled up because, and when I say funneled up, I mean that in the charter schools, a lot of times they have non-certified teachers, so they don't have to pay them what they pay certified teachers. They don't provide all of the programs that we provide in the traditional public schools because they have waivers for all of those things. So they don't have to pay a library media specialist. They don't have to staff a library. They don't have to stock a library. They don't have music and art and PE, and in some cases they don't even provide lunches. The kids have to actually go out and get lunches, or they have to order lunches in. And so all of that money that would have gone to pay for those things is then funneled up to the top of the organization, to the administration. When I say to the administration, I'm not talking about the principal or even the superintendent of the school. I'm talking about the corporation that is behind the funding for that school. And that's why these are big money makers, and that's also why there's so many billionaires involved in charter schools. If you were to investigate, you would see that the Waltons, who are the people who run Walmart, are involved in about 1 out of 4 charter school boards. Now, why would the Waltons care about getting involved in charter schools? Because it makes money. They can make money off of the education of our kids, or lack of, because there is ample evidence out there that shows that charter schools do not do any better job educating our students than the traditional public schools. And if you were to do your research, you would find that um, the charter movement began actually in the 60s. And originally, the charter movement was supported by the teachers union, by AFT and Al Shanker. And the original idea of charter schools was that they would be educational laboratories, and they would come up with these innovative ideas to try out with children's education in an effort to better educate our students. And obviously, the charters nowadays have kind of gotten away from that. The whole idea was that these schools could experiment, and then when they found things that worked, it would be shared with the traditional public schools, which would then improve education for all the kids. But that is not what has happened at all. So, right now, there is a lot of controversy across the United States about charter schools. In Arkansas, we were kind of late getting into the charter school game, and so we'll be late getting out. But if you pay attention to national news, you'll see that there are lots of cases where money has been stolen, corruption, abuse of students, dangerous conditions in the schools, unhealthy conditions, lots of things that we have advocated against for years and years and years, because charter schools do not have to follow the same rules that public schools do. And one of the reasons most people are part of a union is that we negotiate for your working conditions, which are also the students' learning conditions. And when you don't have that, you don't have someone that has a voice, or you don't have a voice amongst your group of workers, then they're going to be taken advantage of. That's just a simple fact of workplaces nowadays. And it has been for years. It's not just a new thing. I mean, think about back in the days before unions existed. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. And think about in other countries where unions don't exist and how those workers are exploited. The same exact thing is happening in our charter schools at the cost of our children's education. And all of this, the whole idea of the fact that we need charter schools to improve public education because this group of students is being underserved, it goes back to testing. And we all know that testing is one of those things that was put into place to make public schools look bad and show that they're failing. And so the odds are kind of stacked against traditional public schools, which, opens the door for charter schools to come in and try to do a better job, which they don't do. So what I'm going to encourage you today to do is to reach out. Reach out to your legislator. The legislature is supposed to recess next week for until they come back later in April to address things that need to be tied up, loose ends that need to be tied up, vetoes that need to be overridden, things like that. And so over the weekend, I encourage you to contact your legislators and let them know that you don't approve of vouchers and you think they are harmful to our children and to public schools as a whole. There's a reason public schools exist, and that is to educate citizens of the United States. Public schools were put in place many years ago in an effort to educate the populace so that we would have people that could carry on the democracy. And when you have private corporations get involved in public education, that is a huge red flag, because I don't want my children educated by someone who is looking to grow workers, because they want workers who are going to work for cheap with no benefits. And I want my child to have a better job with better benefits than even what I have. And so you have to look at the big picture. So I'd like for you to encourage you to call your legislators, email them, text them, however you communicate with them, and ask them to say no to vouchers. Number one, that's the first thing. And number two, if you know somebody whose child is in a charter school, have a conversation with them. Get online and do some research and have a conversation with them. Let them know that charter schools are not the answer, and that they hurt our traditional public schools. They take away money from the kids for their education, and they don't educate students any better than the traditional public schools. As a matter of fact, the traditional public schools in Little Rock, I don't care which one you go to, there are great things happening. There are awesome things going on in Little Rock School District at every single school. And you know, some schools get a reputation for being bad because of the press or whatever, or fights may happen, things like that. Those same things are happening in these private schools and in these charter schools. They're just not being advertised. The press is not interested in putting that out there, because the charter school operators also own the newspaper. And so when those things happen at private schools or at the charter schools, it's kind of swept under the rug, and it's not shared like it is when something happens in Little Rock School District. And so encourage your people to get in their schools. You know, go visit a public school in Little Rock that their kid's supposed to go to. Ask about school choice as far as transferring to a different school or applying to get into a different school. There are options, and I don't believe there's a charter school around that educates kids better than Little Rock School District. And I don't care which Little Rock School District school you're at. Test scores are a snapshot of one day or maybe even a week. And the kids are so over-tested, they don't care about the test anyway. So it's not a real picture of how our schools are educating kids. You want to know how our schools are educating kids? Go talk to the kids. Go talk to the teachers. Go look at the number of scholarships kids are getting out of those schools, out of our high schools. Look at our graduation rate. Those are the things I would be paying attention to. Go up to the school and have a conversation. Ask if you can sit in the hallway and watch when classes change. Those are the things that will give you a real picture of what's going on in our public schools. Teachers and staff, educators, I know that we've been taking a beating in the legislature. I know that we've been taking a beating in the press. Keep your head up. We're going to be just fine. I just want you to know that I'm here as your president. I'm monitoring what's going on. I will keep you informed. You're going to see some movement on our part to try and be prepared for anything that comes, and that's for your protection. So just trust that LREA is not going anywhere, and we're going to do everything we can to protect you and to protect our district. Thanks so much, and have an awesome weekend. Bye.